What is ecology? Ecology is the interaction between living organisms and their environment. Let us look at some definitions and explanations. We're going to start with the habitat. A habitat is the area in which an organism lives. Second point, population. Population is a group of organisms of one species living in the same area at the same time. Then ecosystem. Ecosystem is a unit containing all organisms and their environment interacting together in a given area, for example a lake. It consists of a community and an environment. Now we move on to a community. Community comprises of organisms of all different species living in the same habitat in an ecosystem. Then we have a niche. A niche is the way in which an organism lives its life in an ecosystem. We're going to look at food chains, food webs, and energy flow. A food chain is a diagram which outlines the sequence by which energy in form of chemical energy in food passes from one organism to another, starting with a producer or a plant in most cases. The second point is a food web is a network of interconnected food chains. So let us look at the construction of simple food chains. As we saw in the definition of a food chain, we have to have a sequence in which we can see the flow of energy in the food chain. We start with the producer, as we see above there. Start with the producer, we go to the primary consumer, then the energy goes to the secondary consumer, and then finally to the tertiary consumer. So what is a producer? A producer is an organism that makes its own organic nutrients using energy from sunlight through the process called photosynthesis, or chemicals through the process called chemosynthesis for some producers. And the main example of producers are green plants. Then a consumer is an organism which gets its energy by feeding on other organisms. Consumers may be classed as either primary, secondary, or tertiary consumers according to their position in a food chain. Then we go on to herbivore is an animal that gets its energy by eating plants, for example a cow, a goat, and a donkey. Then a carnivore is an animal which gets its energy by eating other animals, for example lions, jackals, and cheetahs. An omnivore is an animal or person which gets its energy by eating both plants and animals. And by the way, people also eat plants and animals, that's why it's included there. So for example, we have bears, dogs, and monkeys. Then a scavenger is an animal which gets its energy by eating dead organisms that died not due to predation, which is what carnivores do. They go and hunt. There'll be predators, and we have the prey which they hunt on. We'll look at it later on when we look at some food chains and food webs. And some eat refuse as well. Yes, some eat refuse as well. For example, crocodiles, vultures, and hyenas. If you even watch videos on the environment, for example with National Geographic, you can see how vultures and hyenas in most cases behave when they arrive at decaying carcasses. They can eat the carcasses even when they are decaying, like I said previously. A decomposer is an organism which gains energy from dead or waste organic material, for example bacteria. Decomposers are important because they help to release substances such as carbon and nitrogen from dead plants and animals into the environment in order for them to be reused. So not all bacteria is bad, just to let you know. Now we're looking at food chains and energy flow. You have to be cognizant of the definition of food chains that we looked at earlier on. So the example that we're going to have, our first example, ends with secondary consumer. So we start with the plant, which is the producer. It gets its food through photosynthesis, as we looked at earlier on. Then we go to the caterpillar, which is a primary consumer. The prey, it mainly feeds on the leaves, but the plant can also be regarded as a producer. Then we have the secondary consumer, which is the predator, which is the bird. It preys on the prey, which is the caterpillar. And then we have our second example, which is the tree as the producer, and then it is fed on the leaves of the tree are fed on by the giraffe, which is the primary consumer, which is also called the prey. And then the lion is the secondary consumer, which is the predator in that food chain. And then we have a vulture, which is the tertiary consumer. Note that the arrows point at the organism which is consuming the other. That's a very important point. And what I need you to also realize is when the vulture dies, for example, it decays, and then probably that can be used as manure to produce or rather to make the soil fertile for the tree to grow. So it's like a cycle, not just a chain, if you look at it in a broader term. Now we move on to food webs and energy flow. So as you saw in the definition, food webs are a network of food chains. And as we look in our diagram, which is just before us, we can see that we've put in different colors to show the different food chains. But what I would want us to notice is the difference between what's on the right side in the yellow food chain and the rest of the food chains. What I want us to notice is that with the yellow food chain, it ends with the secondary consumer. But with the other food chains, we end with the hook, which is a tertiary consumer. So it doesn't matter where the chain ends, as long as we have a combination of food chains or a network of food chains, it is a food web. And we still respect the same principle or the same interpretation. Note that the arrows point at the organism which is consuming the other. So that's just a general rule. Now we're going to look at more on organisms and food webs. So we're going to define autotrophic organisms, or what we also call autotrophs. These are plants which are capable of synthesizing their own food from simple inorganic substances, hence we have auto, through inorganic chemical reactions known as chemosynthesis, because the chemo represents chemical. And then we have the second point, which is there are possibilities that you will find, for example, a primary carnivore and a secondary carnivore in the same chain. So the primary carnivore can be a carnivore that will eat a herbivore, because herbivores will be the ones eating the producers, which are the plants. So the primary carnivore eats the herbivore, then another carnivore then eats the primary carnivore, which makes that other carnivore a secondary carnivore. That's the idea behind it. Then the next point is a bit of a tricky one. It's a tricky one, but we'll get to it, so we'll get to understand it. When organisms decrease across the food chain, the energy will also decrease, implying that there will be less consumers at every level. So more organisms die and decompose because there was nothing left to consume them, and this will be a loss of useful energy for the consumers. So what I'm trying to say is, if for example, if the producers are to be a lot, if we're going to have a lot of producers, but we have a few primary consumers and fewer secondary consumers, it means these primary consumers and the secondary consumers are just going to feed on a bit of these producers. So which means we're going to have other producers that are going to be left, some other plants that are going to be left, and they're just going to be left to die and decay, and that's lost energy which could have been consumed by other consumers, which is very unfortunate. That's the idea behind loss of energy across the food chain. And as we continue, we see that a good example is if omnivores like vultures and hyenas become extinct. Then we have a question which says, how many carcasses will be lying around in each and every environment on planet Earth? That would be a waste. Then the next part is when the opposite happens, which means we now have less producers and less primary consumers, but we have a lot of secondary consumers, maybe a lot of tertiary consumers. So when the opposite happens, the consumers will die of hunger, and they will be very weak because they don't have enough energy. There's nothing more to eat. It's like you're being starved to death, while the other is just getting a bit, you see. So to bring the idea home for some of you who are still lost, we'll look at the last point, which says to just help some of you to understand this, look at how energy can decrease due to different activities like walking and running, which result in energy loss. This is why you need more carbohydrates when you are very active. You see, you need to eat a lot of energy giving food so that you regain the energy that you have lost. But now imagine if you don't have those carbohydrates. It will be a difficult situation. You'll just be weak for a very long time, which is very bad. An ecological pyramid is a graphical representation which is designed to show the biomass or bioproductivity of each trophic level in a given ecosystem. Our first pyramid is going to be a food pyramid. We have an example there with the food chain that contains green plants first as producers, secondary consumer is the caterpillar, or rather primary consumer is the caterpillar, secondary consumer is the snake, and then the tertiary consumer is the eagle. So what we're seeing on the right is we have more green plants. That's why the base of the pyramid is white, and at the apex we have the eagle, which is we need a less population for that, so it's quite of a small apex. And when we look at what's in the brown, we have an arrow which is pointing downwards, and it's just showing that is the ideal increase in population density. So in a certain area we're expecting that we have more green plants, so that as we go up the pyramid, each trophic level is going to receive enough energy. Now let's look at the pyramid of biomass. The amount of matter in a body is found by drying it to remove all water, also known as H2O, and then using scales or balances to find the mass. That mass is also referred to as dry mass. This amount of matter is the one that is referred to as biomass, which is the actual term we use in biology and ecology. Ecologists find measuring biomass useful because it shows them how much matter is found at each species in a food chain. So we can see with the pyramid, that's the example there, with the same or rather a similar food chain with 6,000 kilograms of plants, 610 kilograms of rats, 59.1 kgs of snakes, and 6 kgs of eagle. It's just showing how we need more mass, more biomass for the plants, so that we have more producers with the wider base. So as we go towards the eagle, the populations decrease, so that we have more food and less consumers, to avoid a situation where in a certain environment we have a shortage of food to consume. Now we move on to the pyramid of numbers. An ecological pyramid of numbers shows graphically the population of each level in a particular food chain. Then the second point is a numbers pyramid shows the relevant numbers of organisms for each trophic level in an ecosystem. In most cases, there are more producers than consumers. However, it is possible that in many ecosystems, there are more primary consumers than producers. For example, a community in the desert, where there are less plants, so we are probably going to have scarcity of plants and of producers, which is going to translate into a problem. Then when we look at the pyramids, we see we have 4 cheetahs, 100 zebras, and 29,100 grass plants. So each zebra is eating around 291 grass plants. Yeah, for the cheetahs, it's quite different. We might have something like 25 zebras per cheetah. Yes, something like that. So we're just trying to put the same illustration. It's not so accurate, but we're saying we have 1 cheetah, 2 zebras, and a couple of grass plants there. We're just trying to show that we need more grass plants and just fewer consumers as we go up, so that, like I said, we don't need a situation where the consumers are starving. We need them to eat so that they can continue with their daily activities. So let's compare some pyramids. We're going to have an example, which is this following food chain, which is above there, which has a plant or a leaf, or plants or leaves, which are going to be consumed by the caterpillar, and they are going to be consumed by the bird. That's the very first food chain that we looked at. Then for the pyramid of numbers, we're going to have a few birds. Let's assume we have 1 bird there, and then we have around 2 caterpillars, and or maybe we can have 4. It's just that we didn't have enough space there to do to put more, but we can add more, maybe let's say 4, and then we have 1 plant. So that 1 plant has many leaves. That's what I want you to notice. Then let's look at the pyramid of biomass. We have that same 1 bird, and then we have the same number of caterpillars, but now translating in the mass, we're just going to have less mass of the birds compared to that of caterpillars, and then we need which means we need more caterpillars, and then we need the biomass for the leaves, because the caterpillars eat the leaves and not the rest of the plant. So if we read the note which is at the bottom there, we have the pyramid of numbers needs less plants because these plants have many green leaves for the caterpillars to consume. However, the pyramid of biomass needs more mass for the leaves trophic level because the rest of the plant is unnecessary for consumption relative to the caterpillars. So which means we need more leaves, we need the biomass for leaves to increase so that more caterpillars can eat, and we have more biomass for caterpillars to feed the bird, which is very hungry. It needs a lot of food, so it's going to need a lot of mass, a lot of dry mass, or what we call biomass in ecology. Another example can be we have a tree or leaves, and then we have the primary consumer, which is the giraffe, and then we have our secondary consumer being the lion. Since we're Shumbafoot, yeah, let's put the lion as an example there. So if we have a tree, it means for the pyramid of numbers we just need one tree. But for the pyramid of biomass, we're not going to use the tree, the whole tree, because it's not the whole tree that is eaten by the giraffe. It just needs the leaves. So we take the mass, the dry mass or the biomass of the leaves. That's the one we use for the broader part of the pyramid of biomass. We use the leaves because that's what the giraffe is going to consume. And then yeah, the rest, the lion just needs we just need less population of lions. A pride can be composed of 3 male lions and probably around 12 female lions, and so which means we need a lot of giraffes if you're going to look at the numbers, but we don't need a lot, because if we then look at the pyramid of biomass and we look at how giraffes, how big giraffes are, we don't need a lot of numbers. We just need a lot of meat for the lions. So we just need a few giraffes, which translates to us having enough. We just need enough meat. So the biomass will be great because we have big giraffes, although we just have a smaller number, but the giraffes are big and they have enough biomass for the lions to feed on. Now that we've looked at all of this, so what's the advice from Shumbafoot? So the first advice is avoid deforestation and promote both afforestation and reforestation. Afforestation is the creation of forests in places where there were no trees, or just planting trees where there were no trees. And reforestation is replacing the trees that were cut down through deforestation or whatever other means, as long as we are replacing trees. This is in order to increase carbon capture. We are currently fighting global warming. That's a very common topic during our time, and statistics estimate that probably by 2050 our planet won't be looking so good. So please just promote afforestation and reforestation. Just plant trees in your yard, at your house, or have places where you can organize as a community to plant trees. It's very good to clean our atmosphere and our environment. And then we look at the next point, which is don't just start open fires, wildfires. Try to avoid them. Don't kill insects unnecessarily. Don't displace animals unnecessarily. Or for the insects one, I know there are people who have a phobia of insects, so unfortunately, but just try by all means, you know. It's just good to, they're also living creatures, they deserve some life. Don't displace animals unnecessarily, especially wetlands, and don't destroy their habitats and the environment in general. Make sure you take wise action and do it with respect and under the guidance of an environmental expert, just in case you make some bad decisions and then you destroy something in the environment. It's better you are under some guidance so you don't make such terrible mistakes. And then the next point is let's avoid carbon emissions to save our planet, and this is the most important part. One of the most celebrated astrophysicists is an American astrophysicist, Mr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, once said, this is just a paraphrased quote, he said this on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert in America, and I paraphrase, if we can turn Mars into Earth, why can't we just turn Earth back into Earth? Why can't we just make it a habitable environment for the next century? It only takes everyone to contribute to turning Earth back into Earth, like Mr. Tyson said. We need to plant more trees. We just need to clear the atmosphere to make it nice and clean. We need to respect the spaces which are occupied, the environments which are occupied by the organisms in our environment, and just make Earth look like a better place than what it is right now, so that we can stay here for a very long time. We cannot watch this planet perish whilst we are aiming to live on another planet with more extreme conditions and worse conditions than we have on Earth. It's just something that we are proposing as Shumbafoot, and there are more things that we can propose and we can advise the world to be cognizant of, but it's just good to make Earth better, and it takes you and me to do the right thing. Stay tuned for more. Siyabonga.